He's the only accomplice to have killed the killer to end it.
Hello, welcome to MAMM Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Strickland. Very excited, very important, distinguished guest. I think the most distinguished guest I've ever had, so I'm a little nervous. Dr. Katherine Ramsland, prolific serial killer writer. I mean, her new book, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, also has a documentary out, which is amazing. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, were you interested in this stuff growing up, or was this something that more developed as you got older and saw more of the world?
I'd say my career is rather circuitous. I certainly didn't aspire to be an expert on serial killers. It became my direction from multiple writing opportunities, and especially I started writing for a little website in the 1990s called The Crime Library, and then Court TV bought them, and suddenly I was working for Court TV for the amassing the knowledge base. I did that for I think about 8 years, and that was multiple serial killer cases. So then I got on documentaries, then I got books, then etc. But not all of my writing career has been about that. And even my education was in philosophy. I was a professor of philosophy first, and then moved into forensic psychology.
What made you transfer to forensic psychology from philosophy?
A lark. Truly. I had taught philosophy for 15 years, and was a transition in my life. And I looked around and saw, I was looking at different graduate programs, and I saw this one that was in New York at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And without knowing, that's the premier school for that. I signed up, they accepted me, and I started commuting from Princeton, New Jersey to John Jay for a couple of years. And I thought it was a grand program. I'm very happy I did it.
So then were you more on the writing end? That's how you got in with the serial killers more, as you were approached about writing this? This wasn't clearly a passion of yours.
No, it wasn't. I mean, it sort of started when I was a kid, because there was a series of murders in my town that were pretty close to where I lived. And, I paid a kind of attention to it. And then I, read about that. The one who was arrested, he wasn't convicted of all of them. He was convicted of one, but I started talking with him, and just lots of correspondence. And this is before I got into forensics at all. It was just more of a curiosity. I mean, a lot of my life has been led by curiosity. When I was 18, I hitchhiked across the country just, to do something else, and then rode a motorcycle across. Both trips were fabulous. They could have been deadly, of course, because I was 18 and 19, but it worked out. And each thing that I did was really about, this looks like interesting, looks like a good opportunity, being ready for an opportunity, having no qualms about jumping into something. And so each thing led to another. I was never caught up in true crime or any of that. In fact, I had, I think, at least 13 books before I ever started any true crime books. I wrote Anne Rice's biography, Dean Koontz's biography. I wrote 6 other books with Anne Rice on her vampire witches, ghost universes. I wrote a couple books for college students, a cookbook, quesadillas.
So you really have run the gamut. I love that.
A lot of writing, but at the same time, also education. And actually, when I left high school, I swore I would never go back into any classroom. And 5 graduate degrees later, my career, everything changed. And that's why I say it was circuitous. It wasn't a clear sense of goals, more like, oh, this looks like something I'd like to do, and investing myself in it. And then each of those things open doors, like the John Jay College degree in forensic psychology, which wasn't for anything in particular. I ended up creating a whole program at DeSales University in forensic psychology. I wasn't even going to
Oh
be a
my God.
college professor. I wasn't going to be a college student. So, all these things occurred and they all seemed good at the time. And so I moved into them. But, that should teach anyone that you can't say when you're 18, I'm never doing this again.
Well, and I think that also it sounds like your curiosity has really served you well. And do you think that that's also why you've been so successful? Because you go in with a curiosity, not with, an agenda or a mindset. And do you think that that has helped you be successful in this realm?
Yeah, I think two things go hand in hand. The curiosity is the driver because I love to learn. But at the same time, I also know you have to be prepared and you have to deliver when you make a commitment. So if I say I can do a book in 3 months, I better do it, and I better do it well. And so I think the two things, once you have established a goal that goes along with your curiosity, then you have to really prepare yourself to do it well.
Well, and Anne Rice, that's neat. Was
Yeah.
she really cool to talk to? I mean, you and I met in New Orleans. So did you go by her whole house and stuff?
No, I was teaching philosophy and literature at Rutgers University at the time. And I read some of her vampire novels, and I think it's The Queen of the Damned, which had themes that were very similar to what I was teaching. So I wanted to read a biography of her, and there wasn't one. So I thought, well, why don't I just call her right when? How hard could that be? That was my third book, and it was hard, but she was very gracious and supportive, and that led to books on her vampire and witches universes as well. Like we did the Vampire Companion, the Witch's Companion, the Vampire Trivia book. We did one on her erotica. So I spent a lot of time in New Orleans, with her and at her various domiciles. It wasn't, again, not something I directed myself into, but I thought of it. She liked the proposal I wrote, and actually, I'll say, she said, I'm not sure, and so I wrote a proposal while she's thinking. And then about a week later, she said, well, my agent doesn't think I should do this because no one knows who you are. And they shouldn't.
Which is always great to hear.
I had one book on Kierkegaard, so it's not like I was anybody. But I said, you said in an interview that people should be allowed to follow their passion. And can I send you this proposal? And just tell me if you don't like it, I'll leave you alone. But she did like it, so it worked out. That's what I mean about it's not just your curiosity. Prepare yourself, move into it, be ready for an opportunity, jump, don't second guess.
And that's great advice. Like that's just great advice in general.
Yeah.
So I was very interested because in your book you had a foreword by Dr. Michael Baden. Baden. I'm awful saying names. I'm so sorry. Sam, cut that out.
Because I have one by Michael Stone too, so I wasn't sure where you're going. But Baden.
Oh yeah, no, yes. I saw he's 91, which is sad for me because I always said if I got murdered, I wanted him to do my autopsy.
Yeah, Michael Baden. So when I started doing this court TV thing, I would come up with ideas for who could I interview and write profiles of in the forensic world. And this is so Henry Lee, Cyril Wecht, and Michael Baden were kind of like the three musketeers of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. And I got myself onto an exhumation team early in the 2000s with Jim Stars. He got me into this organization. And then I would just walk up to them and say, I want to do a profile of you. So I did one of each of them, just showcasing them on the Court TV website. And we just all became associates. And then I became a board member of Cyril Wecht's, his organization. And Baden and Henry Lee would always be there, for every conference. So we just all got to know each other pretty well. And it was years ago. It was probably 25 years ago, which And they weren't the big celebrity people in forensics that they certainly are now, but they were becoming those in those early days. And it was Court TV really that gave a lot of focus on them. It was before Oxygen had switched to true crime. It really, CSI was just starting up. That came in 2000, at the end of 2000. And I was already kind of hobnobbing with these people by then. So I used the Court TV position. I mean, it wasn't Court TV as a production person. I was on the website end. So, but I used it to say, I want to do a profile of you. Would you do an interview with me? And then the first thing I would do is research everything I could find on them and then ask my questions. I find sometimes people will approach me not knowing much and expecting me to carry the ball. And instead, what I'm going to advise everybody is learn your subject. Same thing with serial killers. Learn the subject before you go in asking questions, because you'll be able to frame your questions better, and you'll have a lot of material that will relieve them of having to say stuff that's already out there. Now, when I started, we didn't have social media. The internet was just barely getting going. You didn't have Google searches or any of that stuff. You couldn't find this, but so I would have to find material. But once I did, it was very easy to give them a frame and then ask some questions in an interview and then post it up, with some photos and whatnot on the website.
So you were really ahead of the game, because now true crime is huge.
Yeah, and we were even before Wikipedia, which stole all our stories. When Wikipedia came out, suddenly, I'm finding all my work on Wikipedia without attribution. They've gotten better about attribution, but initially they just scooped up our stories like AI, and posted them on their website, and we did the work. And, no, at least attribution, but they didn't ask them, nothing like that. It was really sort of annoying. But we were one of the very earliest website accumulators of information or knowledge base.
And it's still going today. I feel like I've looked at it before.
No, the one that we had, the crime library.
Oh,
okay.
It's
kind of, you can do it with a search. You can find some of the stuff. But when Court TV went down and transitioned into something else, and now they're back again, but they didn't bring back with them the crime library. So unfortunately, because it was a great resource.
Well, and it kind of would be a one-stop shop, I would assume. They'd kind of want that.
Yeah, but you would think, yes.
Yeah.
But the person who ran it has passed away, so she's not going to fight for it. And there were, I think it was a stable of writers. I wrote something like 225 stories for them of 10,000 words apiece. I mean, I worked night and day for the crime library. And then when the CSI, I think my first forensics book was The Forensic Science of CSI, which came out right as the show was launching. That came, I already had many articles on forensic science and psychology, so I was ready for it.
You were ahead of the game. I love it. By the time it came around, you're like, I'm old hat. I know all this.
and nobody guessed it was going to go in this at all, because it used to be just this niche interest area. And really nobody could have anticipated. It wasn't like I said, oh, this would be a good career move. Nothing like that. Again, it was much more about my own curiosity and interest.
What do you think made it blow up as much as it did?
A lot of things. The O.J. Simpson trial in the 1990s to start, because they filmed that all day long, and it became a way for people to connect with each other over the water cooler at work when everybody's chattering about what happened in the trial today. And they're learning about some of the behind the scenes stuff and investigations that certainly never were part of, Quincy, or any of those rather superficial shows. Suddenly they're realizing the nitty gritty of crime scene investigation. So that kind of planted the seed, and then CSI was proposed and started in 2000. And that, boomed. And I remember saying I saw 3 shows, and I said to my editor at the time, "We need a book on this. This is gonna be huge." And he said, "Oh, no, it's the acting's terrible." But not long after that, another editor called my agent and said, "Do you know anyone could write a proposal on CSI in an hour?" And I could because I was ready. I saw it, and I did, and then they asked if I could write it in 3 months, and I said, "Yes, I can." And so that I was right there because I could see my perspective on it from the 1990s, and I had by that time already worked with John Douglas. I could see this is moving in that direction. I couldn't have told it was going to be the phenomenon that it is. And I think in part some of that was social media came up. And then certainly the pandemic contributed a lot because again, a huge audience all watching the same stuff and wanting to talk about it with each other because of the connection that they were getting out of this and also the puzzle solving. And everybody wanted to, kind of stake their claim on knowing, like what we just saw with the shooter of Charlie Kirk. I can't believe all the things people were speculating about without us knowing anything. And still, everyone had an answer. And people went on rants about it's this and this and that. Here's why it was done. We don't know. We do not know. And yet, that's what we've come to, is that we all think we do know because we've seen enough TV, and some of these stories and read enough books that we are all experienced investigators. I mean, I know CrimeCon, the conference for true crime that is, continued to grow every year. There's a T-shirt they sell, which I think is basically a detective. No, you're not. You're not. But people align themselves. They identify themselves as, well, maybe I'm lacking education and experience, but I sure know how to figure out a crime. Well, I can point to multiple things where people have gone wrong, thinking logic is the same as truth. And that's what we just saw with this particular incident. Anyway, that doesn't answer your question about why is it so popular. I think it's a lot of things that came together in the right time and right place.
That's so powerful that there's a difference between logic and being the truth. And I don't think anyone's ever, that is such a great point, because I feel like the internet's been great to get information out, but also a lot of misinformation. And like you said, everyone's an armchair detective now. Everybody knows, when I almost feel like it kind of undermines all the work that you guys have done. Like you mentioned, Ressler and Douglas, and just because you watch CSI or Criminal Minds doesn't mean...
Well, the internet promotes superficiality and speed. Reading with speed, taking shortcuts, letting others do the thinking for you. And that's a problem if people begin to think. And so what happens with logic is just an empty tool. You have to fill it with the right stuff, because if you fill it with bad information, it's going to spit out bad information. It's just a tool. And yet it feels good if you think you can make it all work. And when it feels good, people interpret that to mean it's true. It's right. And that's a problem, because you can make, like we just saw, we had all kinds of people making connections with, oh, this is some, liberal, blah, blah, blah. Turns out it's just a kid who lived, a Mormon in a pro-gun, pro-Trump family, nothing that anybody was predicting. We had all these conspiracy. Look, the guy next to him touched his hat and then his ear. It's a conspiracy. He's giving signals to the shooter. Oh, a plane came in and then it left an hour later and it's non-trackable. That's got to be part of it. So people felt that the strength of it makes sense. So it has to be true. But unfortunately, that isn't how it works. And many things have made sense, turn out not to be true. And people have been falsely accused as a result.
Well, and also it's kind of hard. I mean, they're mentally ill, and it's kind of hard to predict mentally ill at the end of the day. I mean, there's no logic to it.
Well, it depends on what mental illness you're talking about. There's multiple mental illnesses, some of which are delusional. We don't even know that that's what this is at all yet. We don't have enough information to know that that's what's going on.
That's very true. But I think that we try to do that as a sense of control.
Of course we do. But we need to be reflective over that need as a way to, it's called high need for closure. It's a psychological drive. We want things to be done quickly and permanently so that we are not second guessed and we can take a position with confidence that isn't going to be undermined. And that becomes problematic as people anchor into a certain position and then don't listen to new information that changes what we thought we understood.
Well, you just described most of the country, right?
I know, which is distressing.
It really is. And that, as clearly a scholar and very educated, like you said, Five, is it hard to see that?
It's hard to see it. I try to stay out of the fray, in part because I don't want to be drawn into, there's a contagion effect, especially if there's any kind of urgency to a situation. And then everybody starts talking, and I try to stay out of that because until we really have full information, it's so easy to speculate and make false statements. There's a wonderful, when I do police trainings, which I'm about to do next week, I talk a lot about cognitive errors that go on in observation and interpretation. And one of the things that many people have now heard of is called wizziati. It's what you see is all there is. So you take the first letter of each word, wizziati. What you see is all there is. And unfortunately, we have this idea that if we collect, if we get a collection of facts, that we have the whole story, and now we can start, making deductions off of that. But we might not have the whole story. And if we don't stay open to the possibility that there's something like this situation, that there's something we don't yet know, we close down too fast. And I want people to understand the mind wants things quick, easy, and complete and coherent. That's how our brains work. But our brains can actually work against getting the truth. And a good detective knows that and will always pan back, get perspective, and wait and not be compelled by urgency.
Geez, you're like a Renaissance woman. We're doing police, we're teaching, we're writing. Like, what a prolific career. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, a very male-dominated.
I don't think that it is anymore.
You don't think so? Okay.
Certainly the stars of the show have been male, no doubt about that. But my classes at John Jay were more female than male. And, I just recently saw, actually the police training I'm going to, I think every single instructor over 3 days, all the ones I saw, save one, are female. So I think we're seeing a shift in this, and certainly all the amateur sleuths, while you have a mix of both, I think it's largely female.
And like we said, control. And when you were speaking, and I think you said that that's why people study this, is because it makes you feel like, well, if I can figure out, then I could save myself.
That just makes you more vulnerable, unfortunately.
Really? Why do you think?
Because you don't know that you're not really in control. You think you are. So you think, like a lot of people were saying, about Kohberger, for example, the look in his eye. I should have, everyone can see that no, you can't see anything by the look in their eye. That's like from 19th century criminology. No, you can't see anything by the look in someone's eye as to whether they are going to be violent or not. There's a lot to trying to judge if somebody's going to be violent. And many people who are violent, you never saw it coming. So I'm not sure where we were going with that, but I don't know. I think the idea that we can control this if we have the right formulas or or know what to look for means you're not going to see coming somebody who doesn't fit that frame. And certainly we're seeing that today with this kid who saw that coming. They didn't control for it, even though they thought they had security. They thought they had everything in place. They knew Charlie Kirk. He knew he was getting death threats. They thought they had it all under control. They didn't. So I think if you get in that position that you think you've got it, you're safe, that's when you're the most unsafe. You're too confident.
Also, you're not curious anymore. You think you know everything. And I think all of that boils down to you have to continually want to learn more about them.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said about me the other day that, oh, you know it all. And I'm like, I hope not. I might as well die.
What's the point?
I don't want it. I know, yes, I've been in this field for, 27 years, but by no means do I know everything about serial killers or everything about mass murderers. Or, I hope I can keep learning. I want to keep learning. I don't have any sense that I'm master of all the information out there. I don't want to be in that position.
Who has been the person that was most influential that you have worked with, that really just seeing what they did really took you aback and was like, wow, I can learn from them?
It's a hard question to answer because each thing was different. Like James Starrs I was on his exhumation team. That was amazing. But he was a law professor who had some very basic values that kind of hindered me in learning some things. So, I had a great opportunity, but I wouldn't say he was so influential in my thinking. I worked with FBI profilers. Some of them were more willing than others to really teach the basics, the nitty-gritty of it, to really open up their cases. Bob Keppel, the Ted Bundy detective, was a good friend. He taught me a lot. Al Carlisle, the prison psychologist. I don't know. I don't know if I could give you one mentor, unless it's Kierkegaard. It was the one I wrote my dissertation on. He was a mentor of a sort. And some of the 19th century people who I never met were mentors in the way they pioneered things. So I take a lot of influence. I mean, the editor of the Crime Library was a mentor, and that she gave me multiple opportunities for 8 years all I'd have to do is say, oh, I wanted to study this person or that. Go ahead. They supported everything I wanted to do. I would say that's a big influence. My professors at John Jay College were a big influence.
So not just one, and that makes total sense. What was your favorite topic to write about? Like you talked about mass murder, vampire. Like, was there one topic that you enjoyed more than others?
Well, I wrote a text for the course I created, the Psychology of Death Investigation. It was called Psychological Sleuthing. And I really loved all that stuff. That's really profiling psychological autopsy, evaluating staged crime scenes, the dynamics of team investigations. I had a blast creating that class and writing that book. And that's what I'm often will be teaching in the police trainings I do. Like a lot of them have never heard of psychological autopsy, but it's a really wonderful tool for them to know about for analysis of a case that is potentially a suicide, but they don't know. And so some of the factors that we know. So I'm a suicidologist. That's as that as well. And I used all that to create my crime fiction series, The Nutcracker Investigations. So she's a female forensic psychologist who's a suicidologist who gets involved in really twisty cases that are based on cases that I've been part of or have researched that people have often not heard of, but it gives you an opportunity to explore them in fiction.
Because I had never heard of that term before either. So that was
Great.
really
Hardly anybody
interesting.
has. Yeah.
So you mentioned CSI and that you wrote that book. Did you get to visit the set or anything?
So my Hollywood partner is a former executive producer of CSI, Josh Berman. I didn't visit. Well, I did visit the CSI set, and I actually was in the writers' room for one episode that they ended up using my words and putting them in the mouths of the characters. But I wasn't a regular in the writers' room, and I was more a consultant on the side. I did Bone, CSI, The Alienist, and Woman of the Hour, I think it is, the Anna Kendrick movie about Rodney Alcala. I talked to her a lot about what psychopaths are like. And so that's fun. But I've also been an executive producer of my own shows, and that's been fun. That's been really, and that was, again, Josh Berman. We met on a cruise, a writer's cruise to Alaska in the elevator. Those elevator pitches, you never know. And we became friends. And then when he started working for Sony, he said, pitch me something. And I gave him a long list. And the bottom of the list was what I thought would be a joke, Murder House Flip, where you take HTV and CSI together for houses where murders have taken place, and you heal the murder space and, renovate it. And that sold. And that was 2 seasons we did with that one. So that was a blast.
That is so neat. Well, and like you said, it goes back to being prepared, where you were in that elevator and you were ready. If you were just like, oh, hi, and had nothing, it would almost be a waste of time.
The elevator was, I invited him to a writer's party. And it was later that a couple of years later that he said, I'm in a position to take pitches, pitch me something. And I was ready. That's when I was ready, is with the pitches.
Now, you haven't mentioned Criminal Minds. What are your thoughts on Criminal Minds? Because I feel like that has really opened people's eyes to more of this stuff, the psychology of it. And
I have a book, This Forensic Psychology of Criminal Minds.
So you are just a little expert. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
And in the book, I talk about what really happens with profiling and profilers, not what they do on the show. Although the first season, at least, of the show was based on actual cases, they made up a lot of stuff, like they don't run around on private jets and the whole team doesn't go from one site to another or anything like that. So my book gives the history of profiling and, what the methodology and applications to international cases, things like that. So I know a lot about the show, but I wouldn't say I think it's an unfortunate show in that it gives the impression that profiling is things like reading people, like one will come in tired, don't profile me. Like, that's not profiling. That's a wrong use of that word. Anticipation of future cases, which is threat assessment, not profiling. Yeah, so they kind of diminished the terminology, and while presenting some erroneous ideas about how profiles work, but still, the cases brought a lot of attention to the psychology of death investigation, and that's certainly something that interests me.
Now, let's talk about your newest book, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, which is very exciting. As soon as you mentioned, you were talking about it in the talk, and I was like, it's the Candyman. Like, I knew, and I was just really excited what was it like? I mean, really dissecting an accomplice that became such a part of it. I mean, that's so because all of us, I think, have it in us, and we wonder what would unlock that. And do you think that they use kind of cult tactics? Did you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a grooming kind of thing. It was leveraging. But that book actually grew out of the book I'd done with Dennis Rader, where I spent 5 years working with, the Wichita serial killer. And we then got a 4-part documentary out of that for A&E. And at that time, Dick Wolf and his team were partners with us, and they wanted me to come up with another serial killer to do the same thing with, which I said, I don't have another 5 years to work this out. But uh, I have always wanted to talk with Henley, who is an accomplice, and we have not explored much about the point of view of an accomplice. And when I said that, I had a very different idea about who he was than I came away with after working with him. But the interesting thing was, on our production team was Tracy Ullman, who already had made some contact with him for other research she was doing on the sex trafficking network that she had gotten a lot of information on, that Dean Corll had alluded to, but the police had not followed up on, really doing much with. So because he trusted her, he was much faster to get into this with me than usually it would take a couple of years to get to the point of, let's really work on this. But he was, he'd been in prison by that time 48 or 49 years. And he's the only accomplice to have killed the killer to end it. But still, he was with it for 17 months, and he did murder other kids. So, and this is a kid who wanted to be a minister. So it's antithetical pretty much to who he was, but the way he explained what he thought, the way it happened, was really interesting, because it helped me really sort through the different types of accomplices, because some really are co-equal. He was not. He was actually brought in by David Brooks, another teenage accomplice, to be one of the victims. And that's a really interesting scene in the book. But Corll could see that this is a kid with connections in all these different teenage groups in the Houston Heights neighborhood. So he decided to use him, and he leveraged him by getting him in a compromised situation. And that's usually how grooming into crime happens. First, they see that you're willing to do some petty crime like shoplifting or property damage. You're willing to do that. That means the door is open to keep pushing you. And that's exactly how Corll operated. He was an adult predator who was watching for vulnerable kids. Both Henley and Brooks were highly vulnerable kids, with a lot of family fracturing in their background and abuse and whatnot. Henley had a father who had shot at him twice to kill him, and then left the family in poverty. And he had dropped out of school to try to help his mother. So this isn't a psychopath, this kid. He's somebody who was, blindsided by a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. And so he fell into this, tried getting out, tried telling adults, all of whom dismissed him as, "You're high, you're crazy, I don't want to hear it." He even wrote out a whole confession for his mother, and she tore it up. So he tried getting out. He couldn't. He tried 4 different ways. He couldn't do it. So he stayed with it, not knowing what else to do, until finally one day it was just over the top, and the gun was sitting right by him, and he decided to pick it up and tell Corll to stop. And Corll rushed him, and the gun, he started shooting and shot and killed Corll. So, it was a very interesting book to write, because he was really bright. He was a reader. So he'd been in prison for, almost 50 years at that point. But he had read, far more books than I've read, and was very conversational. He had not ever had therapy. So there was a time when I had been a therapist, but I didn't like it at all. I actually hated being a therapist, but I was willing to, try to guide him through some of the things, like he had nightmares and PTSD and whatnot. So I kind of guided him through some of that, while we were also working on the potential of doing a book. That book then became a documentary, which has won a lot of acclaim. The book got an award, and but that's not how I started out. I want to know about accomplices. I want to have a person who's willing to talk with me about his experience being recruited and groomed by a predator, and that's where it went.
I mean, also, you were going to be a victim. You know what I mean? There's a lot of psychology there where I'm sure that even though you want to get out, I mean, you're scared. He could turn on you at any point. This isn't someone with a moral compass. So,
Well, and also Coral had said he was part of a bigger syndicate of trafficking, and that if something happened to him, they would be coming after Henley and his family. So there was also that kind of coercive factor. You know, people will say things like, "Well, you know, he went home, so he could have gone to the police. He did try telling his mother, did try telling his uncles, but he didn't think he'd go to the police because, first of all, when he was pulled into it, he was 15 years old, and he didn't think anyone would listen to him. And he was right, by the way. He didn't think anyone would listen to him. And he thought even if they did arrest Coral, he'd probably get out and then the syndicate would come after him. So he was confused, didn't know what to do.
I think that's why they choose people like that,
That
though,
is
right?
why
There's
they
this.
choose people like that. And that is why he agreed to do this book with me, only if it was going to be a way to guide adults into, first of all, listening to kids in trouble who might not know how to say it. And secondly, what are the signals that a predator, because the predator doesn't groom just a kid, they groom the neighborhood. They groom the entire community so that if anybody complains or says something that guy's kind of suspicious, he'll get shut down. People will rally to him, the predator, because he has effectively groomed people to believe he's a good guy. And I'm telling you, when he was killed and police started questioning people, no one had anything bad to say about him. Nobody. They just couldn't believe there's any chance he was torturing, sodomizing, and killing kids. They couldn't believe it. No, there has to be something those two boys made up. They're the ones doing it, as if, right? They make the adult. No, because there was a survivor who had a long, detailed story to tell about the way Coral tortured him, which just shows you the predators know how to make people think they're good people.
Well, that's how they get away with it for so long, too. Like you mentioned, Dennis Rader. I mean, I think that you really got an eye into someone that was really great at assimilating to be normal.
Yeah, he knew how to pass. He knew how to, what cube, as he called it, just turning the size of the cube to be whatever he needed to be for any given situation. And that's more what a psychopath can do, because they're not deeply rooted into any kind of emotional integrity or any, or ethics, or they don't care about any of that. They care about themselves. So they know how to pose and be whatever they need to be in any given situation. He was very good about describing that and even coming up with a concept. So that's something that I know that in psychology, we call it compartmentalizing. First of all, it's too long of a word. And secondly, it conveys that these are distinct compartments in their minds. They're not distinct compartments. I think Rader has it right. It's different sides of the same cube, and they can switch and pivot any which way they want.
Did you talk to his wife at all? Did she have any idea?
She didn't have any idea at all. She was absolutely, and nor anybody, his brother. I mean, everybody went to the courthouse and said, his minister, you have the wrong guy. There's no chance. Again, because a successful predator knows how to fool people. And Rader had all kinds of things hidden in all kinds of secret compartments around the house and shed and in the tree house that he built, etc. But no, and honestly, back in the 1970s, nobody's thinking, I'm married to this, or this is my next door neighbor. People don't think like that. We're a little more sophisticated now, but nevertheless, people still will go, there's no chance my spouse or my kid is the perpetrator of this. And that is natural human protective reaction.
But also that's terrifying. Can you imagine? I mean, I feel like you'd also start to question yourself and my perception and the PTSD for the family.
Yeah, you should.
Has to be, or his children even.
Well, Carrie's written her own book and to talk about what was that like when she was blindsided by the FBI coming to her and telling her father was the BTK killer. I think you have to have a certain, you've seen this stuff before. You have some experience so that you understand that people are showing all their faces to you. And those who have these deep, dark secrets, who intend violence or have violence in their past, they want to keep it that way because they're not interested in going to prison. Serial killers do not want to be caught. By the way, that's a myth. And so they're very effective at putting on a facade.
So do you think a lot of it too, do you think they not necessarily study psychology, but like that's a big part of the head games that they play, right? It's
Some
not
do.
just murder.
Yeah, some do. I mean, some study criminal justice because they want to figure out what law enforcement can or can't do. Some study the criminal mind. Some copycat other killers, like Dennis Rader did. He'd read all kinds of paperbacks, about other killers, and to get ideas and to copy some of the things that they did. So yeah, it depends on who you're. We have thousands of serial killers documented, so I can't make any general statement about what they all do because there is much diversity in that population as there is in the human race.
Which makes total sense. Now, I feel like we heard a lot about serial killers, back in the day, Bundy, all that kind of the same time, and we're not discovering them so much now. It's not that they're not there, right? It's more that just we're having a harder time catching them or
harder time finding mediagenic serial killers because the media basically is how we find out these things. And if they don't think a certain serial killer is worth covering or covering very much, the public's not going to hear about it. And also other media like documentary makers. The problem with documentaries is in order to get funded, you have to propose an idea to the funding people. And if you propose a serial killer that nobody's ever heard of, you're likely not going to get funded. But if you propose Ted Bundy and a new angle on Ted Bundy, much more likely because they know that sells, right? So you can't judge what we know about, how many serial killers there are any given time period based on what the media chooses to cover, because there are many reasons why they might not be covering stuff. And there's more serial killers in other countries now because there's more awareness of it. There's more investigative resources being put into it. Doesn't mean there are more of them, just that they're being identified more these days than they used to be. I wouldn't say, there's certainly slightly less, but there's never been 35 to 50 at any given time. That was a number that a certain profiler made up to get money from Congress for a computer. And it was pulled out of the air. There was never any truth to it, but unfortunately it got into criminology textbooks, and a lot of people think it's true. But whenever someone throws that number at me, I just say, well, tell me what evidence you have of this many people missing, or, and certainly we have cases like there was one in Portland recently where there were 3 women that seemed attached to a serial killer. And, people were saying, we think there's a serial killer and the police were, no, that's not true. When they were wrong, because there were not just 3, there were 5, maybe 6. And so now that person's been identified. We now know that was going on. And unfortunately, the police sometimes, because they don't want the public to be scared, will just simply, or they don't have the resources to do much about it. They simply dismiss it and say no. We're finding it. But on the other side is we're getting people going, oh, there's a serial killer in Ladybird Lake in Austin, Texas, or the New England serial killer. Before we even have any information about the bodies and whether they were even homicides, we've got social media groups forming to decide there's a New England serial killer. So we do have now finally a investigator, Kim Rosmo in Texas, who went through all the cases of drownings at Lady Bird Lake in Austin and said it's not a serial killer. There's only one of the 89 or whatever that's clearly a homicide. But so we have the two things. We have police sometimes dismissing when they shouldn't, and we have social media groups making all these links and knowing that they are profilers and that they can definitively say that there's serial killers around here and there. We don't know. So we don't know that how many serial killers there might be operating. Some are in hospitals, for example, getting away with it for years. Sam Little got away with it for decades. We didn't know he was operating, yet he was out there, maybe to the tune of 93 women, as he said. So it's really, these kinds of numbers are very difficult to pin down.
Personally, I've never been able to wrap my head around murdering a stranger. Not saying that I understand murder in general, but I can understand the emotional response of, like a Jodi Arias. Not excusing it, but I can understand it. I just cannot wrap my head around someone that can take someone else's life.
Well, sometimes it's for greed, sometimes for lust, sometimes for a sense of power, sometimes to eliminate a witness to something else. I mean, there's many different motives as to why they might do it.
Has there been a common motive, or is it more buckets, like you said, lust, greed, and
It's
these
kind of like thrill? I mean, there's multiple motives. There's not a common one. No.
Now, you mentioned that you were a suicidologist.
Yep.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
What? That's so interesting. What do you do? Like, what? I've never heard of that before. That's so interesting.
Well, you get very, very conversant with suicide statistics and with past cases of suicide and with really unusual cases of suicide, because what we do know is that when first responders tend to have a bias that essentially, if somebody's stabbed 85 times, the bias is, I wouldn't do that, so they wouldn't do that. So it has to be a homicide. And it doesn't have to be a homicide. And in fact, that case I just said wasn't a homicide. It was definitely a suicide. But the first responders don't know how to understand that. So suicidologists can consult on some of these unusual deaths, or talk about what are the factors we need that would support the finding of suicide, as opposed to there's not really any support here. I think you're looking for accident or homicide instead.
Are there quite a few of you? I mean, are you kind of one of the few experts in this?
No, there's an American Association of Suicidology, so that all those members, but people who use it in an investigative way, I would say, are probably few.
So is there one thing that if someone takes away from your career, like this was your big, have you ever thought about that, your legacy, what you hope that'll be?
I mean, I guess what I have striven to do is keep pushing the boundaries. I took on Dennis Rader, for example, because he was an outlier. He didn't fit the formulas. Looking at Henley, we see more in this case than the simplistic formulas they used 50 years ago to put him in a box. So maybe my background in philosophy helps me to recognize how important it is to stay open to things we don't yet know that may change the picture. And I think if I've made any contribution to our understanding of crime, for example, it's that be careful not to jump to conclusions too fast, because something else may come in that would take this case in a whole different direction, or we might have a very unique case unlike any we've seen before. We need to always stay open to that.
And I think that really sums up kind of everything that you've said today, too, in your career, and that you've gone in with that. And thank you so much. It was so interesting and nice to talk to you and hear these things. And honestly, gave me some good advice where to be prepared, like you're definitely a person to aspire to be like. So this is a true
my
crime.
one piece of advice that I give that I have lived by and I give to everybody is it's better to be told no than to lose an opportunity you might get if you ask.
I fully agree. And I feel that way. That's why I asked you to be on this podcast. What's the worst you're going to say? No. And then, hey, you're not my person anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Please, everyone, check out The Serial Killer's Apprentice. I mean, just amazing, into the mind. Cannot recommend enough. The documentary, too, I was watching, just amazing. And you look beautiful in it, too, by the way, just FYI.
I'd like to pitch for my crime fiction because it's all based on real people I've worked with and on real cases I've worked and real forensic methodology and the suicidology that I just talked about. So you'll get a very different type of crime fiction in the series I just wrote. And one of them just came out last week.
Oh, what's the title of it?
You Can't Hide. I think I've got it right here.
Yes, let's see it. Let's see it.
Yes, let's see it. You Can't Hide. Whoop,
I love that. That's a good cover.
The Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Oh.
Favorite places to go.
That's good to know. I love North Carolina as well. Maybe we'll meet in an elevator sometime and I can pitch you something.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Katherine. You have a wonderful day, and thank you for your contribution in general to this world. It's amazing.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks. I'll see you later.